Good evening, everyone. It's been a while, but I'm back with another question of the week. This time asked by Charminder X105LE2RN. Watching Seed, I never understood what the N-Jammer Canceller is. I always thought it was just a nuclear-powered engine. So to immediately answer the second part of that question, it's not the nuclear engine itself, but it did become an important part of it. And to explain exactly what that part is, we must first explain the N-Jammer that it is canceling. And for that, we have to look at the beginning of the First Alliance Plant War, also known as the First Bloody Valentine War, named after the event that kickstarted the whole thing. So, prior to this Bloody Valentine incident, the plants had been slowly moving to become more and more independent from the Earth, and as part of this, they had also begun to slowly increase their military power. Something that was, of course, not exactly taken too kindly by the powers on Earth. At first, talks were attempted, but these were all thwarted by convenient terrorist attacks, which are allegedly linked to Blue Cosmos. And as a result of these peace talks breaking down, the Earth Alliance declared war on the plants and immediately sent out a task force to the agricultural colony known as Junius 7. And presumably in an attempt to show their might, and also to bring the war to a quick conclusion, they launched a nuclear missile at the colony, completely destroying it, and killing 243,721 people in an instant. The ship carrying this nuke was called the Roosevelt, clearly showing that they had intended to replicate the effects of the nuclear bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But instead, it seems that they had replicated the effects of Pearl Harbor. Rather than trying to vie for peace, the plants immediately began preparing for war and also launched their own attack. The plants, or more specifically ZAFT, were out for blood, and rightfully so, seeing what happened. And on top of that, they had the military might to actually back this up. Their GINs would prove to be immensely superior to the Earth Alliance, and they were able to overcome their numerical disadvantage. The problem was, though, no matter how good they would be able to do on the regular battlefield or the conventional battlefield, however you want to call it, the Alliance's vast nuclear arsenal remained an incredible threat, and they had shown that they were willing to use those nukes. So in response, the plants began to develop something that would help them to stop the Earth Alliance from using these nukes altogether. And the result of this research was the neutron jammer, shortened to the N-Jammer. Basically, these things would prevent any and all nuclear fission and therefore render the Alliance's nukes useless. But they didn't just stop nuclear missiles, they also stopped nuclear power plants and, well, every other nuclear applications. And most of the Earth's economy relied on nuclear power plants like this. You can see where this is going. The N-Jammers were first tested out at the Battle of Yggdrasil, and their deployment was an overwhelming success. So shortly after this, Operation Ouroboros would be approved by the Plant Supreme Council, and part of this plan was to scatter the N-Jammers all over the planet. And these things were drilled straight into the ground, so they were both difficult and time-consuming to remove.
撤去できないんですか？無理無理。地中のかなり深いところに打ち込まれちゃっててさ、数もわかんないんだぜ。できりゃやってるよ。
Combined with the N-Jammers in space, ZAFT now no longer had to worry about one of the Earth Alliance's main advantages. But, like I said before, this wasn't the only thing the Endjammers were stopping. With the Earth's nuclear power plants no longer working, it was just a domino effect of one crisis after another. With just one device, the Earth was plunged into an energy crisis, an economic crisis, a food crisis, humanitarian crisis, and basically any other crisis you can think of, resulting in over 1 billion people being affected. And because this all happened on April the 1st, this became known as the April Fool's Crisis. And in addition to stopping nuclear fission, the Endjammers also had yet another feature that benefited the ZAFT forces. It disrupted radio waves and could also jam radars. So basically similar to what the Minovsky particle was able to do in the original Gundam. And this is then how we get to the Endjammer Canceller. Because, sure, ZAFT had prevented the Earth forces from using nuclear power, but the Endjammers were also preventing ZAFT and the plants from using nuclear power. So as soon as those Endjammers were completed, they began to research a way on how to circumvent them. After all, like it was said in the anime, they made them, they probably also have a way to get around them.
N-Jammer のコーディネーターの作ったものですからな。確かに奴らならそれを無効にするものの開発も可能でしょうが、それが本当なら由々しき事態ですな。
And while it did take them quite a while, they would eventually create the Endjammer Canceller. And so, to circle back to the question, this device wasn't something that generated nuclear power by itself, but allowed, the nuclear fission to happen. And then the simplest way to explain how this works is that the Endjammer creates a giant field within which nuclear fission is impossible, and then the Endjammer Canceller emits its own field that cancels out the Endjammer. But compared to the massive Endjammers, the Endjammer Canceller is a much smaller device that also only emits a field that is big enough for the thing that it's installed in. And a fun fact is that the first Endjammer Canceller that was ever used was installed in the Dreadnought Gundam, but because that was a prototype unit, it was also much more powerful than it needed to be, and the field that it generated actually went beyond the Dreadnought Gundam itself. So it didn't just allow the Dreadnought Gundam to use nuclear fission, but whatever was in the vicinity of the Dreadnought Gundam could also use nuclear power. So, again, to go back to the question, the Endjammer Canceller isn't the engine itself, but it is required to make the engine work. And because of this, it was a relatively simple device that could easily be installed into anything that needed nuclear fission to happen. Be it nuclear power plants, nuclear-equipped mobile suits, or nuclear missiles that the Endjammers were created to stop in the first place. So maybe ZAFT should have invested a little bit more into their security, because just imagine how the war would have gone if the Endjammer Cancellers weren't stolen, if the plans for the Endjammer Cancellers weren't stolen, or if they simply hadn't tried to create them at all. Because, one, their nuclear-powered Gundams either had little effect on the war at best, or were being actively used against them at worst, and two, getting their nuclear arsenal back was a giant morale boost for the Earth Alliance and allowed them to effectively retake the offensive in space. Because, yes, by the end of the war, ZAFT was losing on Earth, but unlike Zeon in the original Gundam, they seemingly still had plenty of troops in space, and they still had a lot of fight left. And it really wasn't until the Earth Alliance started whipping out their nuclear arsenal again that we really see them like dunking on ZAFT in space. Like, especially Boaz was a giant loss for ZAFT. Like, I would say that the only real advantage that they got out of those N-jammer cancelers was their giant doomsday weapon, Genesis. But while it is undeniable that it was a very powerful thing and really scared the Earth Alliance during the final battle, if they hadn't built it, all of that money and those resources could have gone to other things. More mobile suits, a non-nuclear powered doomsday weapon like the solar ray used by the Earth Federation in the original Gundam, things like that. So I think it is very fair to say that ZAFT might have actually straight up won the war had they not made the the N-jammer canceller. But let me know what you think about that down below. How would the war have gone had ZAFT not made the N-jammer canceller? Or would the Earth Alliance have been able to drag out the war long enough for them to make their own version of the N-jammer canceller? But I think that about does it for this video. So if you have any questions for future questions of the week, let me know down below. Because I am again going to try to make this a somewhat regular series. And I have to say somewhat because there's always something that could come in between. For example, this video, I wanted to make it last month, but then like the whole debacle with the metaverse happened, all of those Gunpla and Gundam Seed Freedom information came out, so I had to push it back. But it is what it is. So as always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope everyone watching has a great evening, and I'll see you all next time.